Hey everyone, this video is a tutorial on the ICON simulation, the UN Security Council simulation that we'll be doing in POS 273. And in the email that you received from me, you had a copy of the simulation guide for this semester. And I want you to look at that closely before you go too much further. Review the material that's there, maybe even print that out and have it in front of you as you work through this video, because there's a lot of important information there. It's really important that you understand how this is going to, how we're going to carry out this simulation and what you'll be expected to do before you go much further. So if you haven't done so yet, go ahead and review that or print it out and have it in front of you. And there's some overlap between what's in the guide and what's in this video. The guide you can also access at any point on Blackboard. There'll be an electronic copy of it there as well. So it's not just buried in your email. So a quick overview of the simulation. As I've said, the simulation is designed to simulate country negotiations at the UN Security Council. And specifically, you're going to be engaged in both informal and formal negotiations on 2 resolutions on different issues before the UN Security Council. So remember that resolutions in the UN Security Council carry the weight of international law. They can condemn a state's actions. They can authorize use of force. They're very powerful and very important. And so you're going to be debating amongst yourselves as representatives of countries whether or not you want these resolutions to have the force of international law, whether you want this to be the statement of the international community. Specifically, you're looking at 2 resolutions, one proposed by Russia in relation to territorial claims and militarization of the Arctic Circle, which is a very real issue, and a second on human trafficking in the Middle East and North Africa, proposed by France. There are technically 4 resolutions. We're only going to deal with 2 of them just because of the abbreviated nature of this course. I'll go into that in a second. And the simulation will culminate with you as representatives for your country voting on those resolutions at the end of week 5. So there'll be a lead-up negotiation period, and then you actually have to say whether you support them, you don't support them, or you want to abstain. And throughout, even before you begin the simulation, there's a series of short assignments that are designed to help you prepare for this simulation and also reflect on what you've learned in relation to course material. So that's a quick overview of the simulation. In the email that you received from me, you have your country assignment. So what country you're going to represent at the UN Security Council. You have any special roles that you might have. So if you're a member of the Permanent 5, that will be in your email. If you are the president, Japan in this simulation is the president of the UN Security Council, then that will be made clear. And if you're sponsoring one of those resolutions, that will also be clear. And you'll get instructions on how to access the simulation, how to gain access to the platform, how to pay for the simulation. And if you didn't get that email, or anything is unclear in that email, or you have any issues accessing the ICON's platform, just contact me immediately and we'll get it figured out. And then I would encourage you to log in and look at the resources available on the ICON's website. I'm actually going to run through those a little bit. Before I do that, I want to hop into Blackboard. And so in Blackboard, your International Relations course, if you go to Assignments and Study Guides, there is a link to the ICON's website, should you need it. And then there is a folder that has all of the assignments related to the ICON simulation. There's the guide, which you have, and then you have the 3 assignments that you'll be doing. The first is the pre-negotiation planning report, second is the midpoint report, and the last is a short reflective paper on the entire experience. So you'll want to review these and be mindful of what you're going to be asked to do. These are relatively short assignments. It's mainly kind of informational. It's designed to arm you with the information that you need in order to be effective in the simulation. But keep in mind the due dates. So this first assignment is due June 3rd. A week later, midway through the simulation, you have a midpoint report, and then the simulation reflection paper wraps it all up at the end of the course. So go ahead and hop over onto Blackboard, review those assignments. You do have a link here to the ICONS website. So the simulation itself is hosted in an external website through something called ICONS, which is a simulation consortium through the University of Maryland. And they have a host of different types of simulations available. You don't have to find the specific simulation that we're doing, because you are going to get a personalized link to register for our specific UN Security Council simulation. So this is, if you were to click through on the link that's in your email, you would see something like this. This specifically is the link for the country representative for China. And so when you click that link in the email, you get taken to this page where it's going to ask your name, your last name, and then email and confirmation of your email. And if you entered that info in and then you clicked continue, you would be taken to a payment processing center so you can provide a bit more information and payment information. The simulation does cost money. It's external to the university. And so in the same way that you would pay for a textbook, you have to pay for access to the simulation platform. But it's not too expensive. It's about $13. And you'll need a credit card in order to register for that. So that's how you sign up for the simulation. I'm going to go ahead and log into the simulation. The one thing that you will need is your simulation number, which our simulation number is 5462. And when you click log in, you'll be taken to a screen. You won't see this. I'm able to select the role as I'm the instructor. And so my role technically is SimCon. So if you see any messages from SimCon, that's me. I kind of oversee the simulation. But SimCon also enables me to play the role of different countries if I were to choose to do so. I won't step in and play a role on your behalf, but I do have that ability here. But I'm going to select a role just to give you a sense of what it's going to look like from your perspective. I have some different screens and different things that are available to me, but I'm going to go ahead and select China so you can see what the platform looks like. It's pretty straightforward, right? So this is what you would see when you would log in if you were China. It's going to tell you who's currently active. So if there's somebody online currently, you'll be able to see that. And if there were messages that you received, you would be able to see that. So it'll tell you your total number of messages and then whether or not you have unread messages. The Messages tab is going to be how you're going to communicate in the initial week of informal proceedings. So messages, in order to send a message to another country, you would just click compose message. You have the option of sending a message to everyone, and usually countries will provide some sort of initial welcome, or there might be situations in which in those informal proceedings you want to address the entire group. But many times you're addressing individual countries, what we call bilateral negotiations, or a small group of countries, right? So say that you're in South Africa and you want to reach out to your fellow African countries and strategize about ways you might be affected by a resolution. You could click Nigeria and Morocco and just message those countries. You have the option of choosing which issue you want to talk about, so either the human trafficking resolution or the Arctic Circle, or it can be a general procedural point. So if you were sending a message to everyone just to say hello and to wish everyone the best in their negotiations, then you would click procedural. It's important that you don't accidentally send messages to people that you don't want to have information. So if you were trying to send a message to Nigeria and Morocco about your strategy and you accidentally sent it to everyone, that could be bad. You might be revealing information to the entire group that you don't want to reveal. So be mindful of that. And also subject lines are important. So once the simulation gets flowing, if people are very active, sometimes you'll have dozens of messages and you have to sort through them and try to figure out what's important, what's not important, or you might want to find a message from earlier. And if you've given your message a relevant subject line, then it's easier to find. So all of that's important. You can attach files if you want. So if you had an external article that related to something that's relevant to the simulation, you could actually attach that. Then once you had composed your message, you were comfortable with it, you would just click send message. So that is the way that we will be communicating in the initial week of informal negotiations. Once we move into the second week of formal negotiations, the messages tab actually shuts down. Any communications that you make during that formal negotiation period happen in the council chambers. And when you would log in here and go to the chamber, you would see a current meeting, which would be the current negotiations over these two resolutions. And then you don't have the option of communicating one-on-one with countries any longer. You can refer back to those messages, you don't lose them, but anything that you say has to be before the entire group. Okay. So that's, as I said, the first week we'll be using messages. The second week of the simulation we'll be using the council chamber for the formal negotiations. And that is also where voting will occur, right? You'll see some things that aren't here currently, but once there's a meeting, there'll be an option for you to formally cast your vote at the times that it's scheduled in the agenda. The resolutions. So we have two resolutions that we're dealing with. One is the human trafficking resolution sponsored by France. The other is the Arctic Circle sponsored by Russia. You can review the resolutions here. The resources tab is very useful in terms of fine-grained detail about the resolutions themselves. So under resolutions, you get the resolution text, but under resources, you get a more detailed discussion of the issue itself. One thing that you want to note, this simulation is designed for 4 different resolutions. And as I said, we're only doing 2, right? We're doing the one on the Arctic Circle and the one on human trafficking. I've tried in the past in this 6-week session to do all 4, and it just becomes unwieldy. It's kind of too much information to process and too much for students to take in a 6-week session. So as I said, we're doing the Arctic Circle and we're doing the human trafficking resolution. Those are the only things you should be discussing. Those are the only things that you will be voting on. The issue briefs tell you a little bit about the issue, the background, current issues. It's not in a great degree of detail, but it's enough that you get the general thrust of the issue. But this resources tab generally, there's lots of really good stuff here. In particular, Roll Sheet is a good resource for you. So this is specifically designed for your country. It's going to talk about your historic role in the council, your general foreign policy approach, your role on the UN Security Council. So, what have you done in the past on the UN Security Council? What has been your strategy? Who do you typically align with? How do you present yourself outwardly to the international community? And then it's going to provide a little bit of information on where you might stand on the issues, relevant things to consider on these issues. So again, remember that we're doing the Arctic Circle and human trafficking. So these other aspects related to different issues and different resolutions you can disregard. So the roll sheet is helpful. Research library is just kind of a clearinghouse of information, both related to the UN Security Council, but also the issues themselves. So these are external sources. They would take you through to external sources that might also be helpful. And participant guide, I don't know that you'll need this a whole lot. A lot of this information is already in your the icons guide that I provided to you, so you shouldn't need to delve too far into this. Entity information I think will be helpful when you want to get a sense of who are the other countries on the UN Security Council and what might be their considerations as they move into negotiations. So part of what you're doing when you're strategizing and thinking about how you want to present yourself on the council is thinking about your own interests and what will be relevant from your country's foreign policy and to your country's citizens. But you also want to think about who are your potential allies, who thinks about issues in similar ways. And so you do want to read entity information so you get a sense of where these other countries stand. In particular, you want to see where the permanent five stand and where your historical allies on the UN Security Council are standing on these issues. So that's going to tell you that information for all of the countries that are not you. In this case, we're looking at China's entity information. So China is included there, but the representative from China would really be zeroing in on these other countries. So the only other thing I'll just point out, that if you are the president, if you're representing Japan, the president guide in the resources tab is going to provide information about some of those procedural roles that you have. And that really only applies to phase 2, to the formal meeting in the actual council chambers that's going to happen in the second week that we're running the simulation. You don't have too much in the way of any formal responsibilities when we're doing phase 1 with informal discussions. You might send an opening message at the beginning of the simulation, but really those tasks kick in the second week that we'll be doing it. So that's basically it. There's a ton of information here. I would encourage you, before you do the pre-negotiation planning report, to really carefully review the simulation guide and to look that over, and then head to the ICONS website, go ahead and sign up, give them your payment information, and then once you're on the platform, review what's there, but really delve into that section with resources. So as I said, with this icon simulation, we're doing this over a 6-week course, and we're now in week 2 of the course. So what you should be doing this week is just accessing that platform, getting access to the materials. Week 3 is going to be devoted to learning about your country and the issues, and the pre-negotiation planning report, that's the first assignment, is going to be due June 3rd, right? And then right after that, we begin informal negotiations. So the informal negotiations start up on Monday the 4th. That will be open. You can start sending messages. You can start communicating with other countries, and you'll kind of be off and running in the informal negotiations. I ask you to do an assignment about halfway through. That's mainly just checking in to see how your strategy is going, what you're learning as you're doing this. Are you learning things about other countries and their strategy, and is that affecting how you're approaching the simulation? And then as we move into week 5, we will convene the formal meeting in the council chambers. There will be an agenda that will be circulated by the president of the UN Security Council, and they will schedule votes on both of the resolutions. And all of the voting will wrap up by Friday, June 15th at 10 p.m. So when that agenda is circulated, you want to look at it really closely and make time to be active in the both the council meeting and even the week before in the informal negotiations. You want to be checking in on multiple occasions each day to see if anyone has sent you a message, to see if there's things that you have to respond to see if there's public statements from other country representatives that are relevant to you. I've found in general that the simulation is a lot of fun, but it's only as fun as the level of engagement and the level of care that students put into it. So part of your grade for the icon simulation is just your participation. You should be checking in regularly. You should be communicating regularly. If someone sends you a message or asks you a question, you should be prompt in your response. So particularly in weeks 4 and 5, it is very important that you make regular time to log on to icons, not only to respond to messages sent to you, but to send messages to other countries. And to participate in the formal proceedings in the UN Security Council chambers. And that, if everybody's active there, I think that will create a more realistic experience, and it'll be a more fun experience for everybody involved. And then that final week, we don't actually do anything in the platform itself. You'll be able to access the materials. You'll be able to look at what was said in the UN Security Council. But we won't be doing any negotiations. The simulation will effectively be over, but there is a final assignment that is a reflection paper. And I'll do a bit of a debrief. As you know, the SimCon, I'll look at what happened during the during the simulation, who are the most active participants, who took on the most aggressive roles or the most conciliatory roles. So I'll put together a few pages of notes, just kind of trying to pull it all together that you can review as you do that final assignment. And then that's basically it. That's what we're going to do with the simulation. So I think this is a really good opportunity to take some of the abstract concepts and ideas that we're learning in the class and put them into practice and do an active learning experience. In my classes, I try to integrate as many of these sorts of active experiences where students are actually applying things as opposed to just absorbing information as possible. And this is a pretty good one. Students have had fun with it. I would just reiterate, though, that this assignment and this experience will only be as fun and exciting and educational as you make it. And so the more that you participate, one, the better your participation grade will be, but more importantly, the better this experience will be for everybody involved. So I would just stress that again at the end. So if all of that is clear, if everything I've just laid out makes sense, then go ahead and sign up for Icons, start to explore the platform, start to move through that Icons simulation guide. And at any point, if anything is unclear, you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and shoot those questions to me. And other than that, your first assignment will be that pre-negotiation planning report that is due on June 3rd. And I look forward to reading them. Thanks very much.